Whatever you imagine becomes a fact. That which you dare to assume inwardly must one day stand before you outwardly. The world you behold is not separate from you. It is yourself pushed out, clothed in form and circumstance. Every condition of your life has its root in an unseen imaginal act, whether conscious or unconscious. If you would change the outer, you must first alter the inner. Do not waste time wrestling with shadows in the world of effects. Go directly to the cause, your imagination. It is imagination that plants the seed of every experience. Whatever picture you accept as real within, no matter how far-fetched, will harden into fact in due season. When you close your eyes and dare to feel what you wish were true, you are not indulging in idle fantasy. You are shaping destiny. Assume the mood of the wish fulfilled and persist until it feels natural. The moment it feels natural, creation is finished. From that instant forward, the world will rearrange itself to reflect your assumption. So I say, imagine nobly. Do not limit yourself by reason or appearances. Everything visible was once unseen. Everything tangible was once only imagined. Whatever you dare to claim in the silence of your mind, clothed with feeling, you must inevitably encounter in the visible world. Therefore, tonight and every night, enter the state of your fulfilled desire. Walk in the joy of answered prayer. Live as though your dream were already fact, for imagination creates reality, and what you imagine with faith must become your world. Imagination is the root of all experience, because nothing in the world could ever appear without first being conceived within the mind. Every invention, every achievement, every relationship, and every circumstance is born out of an imaginal act, whether knowingly or unknowingly assumed. The mind fashions images, and those images become the blueprint upon which reality is built. Even the most ordinary events of life have their silent beginnings in thought and feeling. To transform experience, one must turn inward, shaping imagination with intention. For the unseen imaginal world is the fountain from which all visible life flows. The outer world is imagination objectified. For nothing appears in the realm of facts that was not first conceived within the unseen depths of the mind. Every building, every invention, every work of art, every condition of life began as an idea held in imagination, and what is true for great creations is equally true for the smallest details of daily existence. The circumstances we call reality are but crystallized states of thought and feeling, hardened into fact through repeated assumption. What we dwell upon inwardly, whether with fear or with faith, inevitably takes form, for imagination is the creative power animating all that we experience. If one persists in believing lack, limitation, or failure, those states will reflect back in the external world, just as surely as persistent visions of abundance, freedom, or love will draw their own confirmation. The outer world is therefore not an independent reality, but a mirror faithfully echoing the inner states entertained. To attempt to change the mirror without altering the inner picture is futile. True transformation begins when imagination is directed consciously and nobly, when one assumes the state desired and sustains it until it becomes natural. For then the world must reflect that assumption. Inner assumptions create outer facts, because the world around us is not separate from the thoughts and feelings we consistently carry within. Every assumption, whether born of faith or of fear, sets a creative law into motion that must express itself in the conditions of life. The invisible world of imagination is the workshop in which every experience is first shaped, and assumption is the mold that gives direction to this unseen power. When you dare to accept a state as true within, even before there is evidence of it in the world, you have already sown the seed of its manifestation. The subconscious mind, which accepts as real whatever is impressed upon it, faithfully reproduces the state assumed. This reproduction does not occur through effort or struggle, but through the natural outworking of the law of consciousness. If you continually assume lack, you will encounter circumstances that confirm lack. If you assume abundance, love, or success, those facts will also be drawn into your experience with the same certainty. The outer life cannot help but rearrange itself to match the inner conviction. Therefore, the key to transformation lies not in fighting circumstances, but in mastering assumptions. The question is never whether it will work, but whether you will persist. To assume the end and live inwardly in the feeling of the wish fulfilled is to claim the fact before it appears. In time, the invisible must become visible. The assumed must become experienced, for consciousness is the only reality and assumption is its creative act. Do not fight circumstances. Change your imaginal acts, for the world you see around you is not fixed, independent, or unchangeable, but only the reflection of states of consciousness you have entertained. When you fight conditions, resist people, or struggle against appearances, you give power to shadows while ignoring the true source of their existence. Every event, every encounter, every circumstance is nothing more than imagination outpictured, and therefore the remedy is not found in battling the outer, but in altering the inner. The imaginal act is the seed of creation, and what you consistently imagine and accept as true will one day harden into fact. If you are faced with lack, conflict, or limitation, recognize these not as permanent realities, but as the outpicturing of former imaginal activity. To continue to react against them only sustains their hold, for resistance feeds the state you wish to escape. Instead, enter within and imagine the scene that implies your desire is already fulfilled. See yourself in possession of the solution. Feel the relief, the joy, the confidence, and persist until that inner vision becomes more real to you than the problem itself. This change in assumption does not merely comfort you, it sets into motion the law of consciousness that reshapes your world. Circumstances have no life of their own. They are animated only by the imaginal power that gave them birth. To fight them is to mistake the effect for the cause. By turning within, you reclaim your authority, for imagination is the true creative center, and the outer world must conform to its direction. Your task, then, is not to wrestle with appearances, but to assume nobly, to revise the past in imagination if necessary, and to persist in the end you desire. What you dare to imagine and sustain with feeling must ultimately displace all that contradicts it. For the imaginal act once accepted cannot fail to externalize in the world of fact. Feeling the wish fulfilled is the creative secret, for imagination clothed in emotion is the force that shapes reality. Mere thinking or idle daydreaming carries little power compared to the deep conviction that arises when one feels inwardly the reality of a desire as though it were already accomplished. Feeling is the bridge between the invisible and the visible, the unseen state and its outward manifestation. It is not enough to state affirmations mechanically or to visualize without emotion. The true creative act occurs when you inwardly enter the state desired and experience it with such vividness that it feels natural to you. When you imagine yourself to be what you long to become and accompany that vision with the sensation of fulfillment, you impress the subconscious mind with a new blueprint. The subconscious accepts this feeling as fact and begins to reorganize circumstances, opportunities, and even people to bring about the reflection of that state in your outer life. This process is not dependent on effort or manipulation, but flows naturally, for creation is finished the moment the assumption is felt as true. The world then rearranges itself to make visible what has already been accepted within. This is why Neville Goddard stressed the importance of entering the end and dwelling there. To feel the wish fulfilled is to move beyond hoping or wishing, which only affirm the absence of what you desire. Instead, it is to live inwardly in the joy of possession, to walk mentally in the reality of your answered prayer. It means tasting the sweetness of success before it appears, enjoying the warmth of love before it is outwardly expressed, and experiencing the relief of freedom before circumstances testify to it. In doing so, you plant the seed of a new state, and that seed must bear fruit according to its nature. The secret lies in persistence. At first, the mind may resist, arguing with reason and evidence, but if you return again and again to the state of fulfillment, eventually it takes root and becomes natural. When it feels natural to you, when you no longer strain to imagine it but rest in it with ease, the creative act is complete. From that point onward, the outer world can do nothing but echo the inner conviction. Therefore, cultivate the art of feeling. Do not simply see your desire in imagination, feel it. Ask yourself, what would it be like if this were already true? And dwell in that answer. Let the tones of reality color your inner experience until the line between imagination and fact dissolves. Feeling the wish fulfilled is the doorway to creation. For what you feel inwardly with conviction must inevitably be mirrored outwardly in the life you live. Persistence, until it feels natural, guarantees manifestation, because consciousness does not respond to fleeting wishes or passing thoughts, but to the state that becomes established within as real. When you first begin to assume the end, it may feel like pretending, a fragile picture that seems to collapse under the weight of reason and evidence. Yet imagination, when revisited with faith and feeling, gradually impresses itself upon the subconscious until the new assumption takes root. It is this persistence, the repeated return to the wish fulfilled, that transforms imagination into conviction and conviction into fact. In the beginning, the old state, the one of lack, fear, or limitation, still feels natural because it has been rehearsed unconsciously for so long. The mind is accustomed to entertaining doubt, to reacting to circumstances, to believing only what the senses report. But senses do not create reality, they only report it. To rise above their testimony, you must persist inwardly in assuming the state you desire, regardless of appearances. Each time you turn away from the evidence of the outer world and return to the inner vision, you are watering the seed of your new reality. Persistence is not straining, nor is it frantic repetition. It is quiet determination, the steady choice to dwell in the feeling of the fulfilled desire, no matter how contrary things may seem. Even if you slip into doubt or fall back into the old state, you can always return. The key is consistency, for the subconscious accepts what is impressed upon it through repetition and feeling. Just as a habit is formed by continuous practice, so a new state becomes natural by persistent assumption. As persistence deepens, there comes a shift. What once felt like effort now begins to feel easy. The new state no longer seems like imagination but reality itself. You no longer struggle to believe, you simply rest in the knowing that it is done. This is the moment creation is complete, for when the desired state feels natural within, the subconscious has accepted it as fact, and the outer world must conform. Nothing can prevent the manifestation of an assumption once it feels natural, for reality is compelled to mirror the inner state. This is the law of consciousness, operating with impartial certainty. Just as gravity does not discriminate, the creative power of imagination does not choose between noble or ignoble states. It simply brings forth what is most vividly and persistently assumed. Therefore, the wise deliberately persist in noble assumptions, returning again and again to the vision of fulfillment until it becomes the atmosphere of their inner life. Persistence requires patience, for manifestation unfolds in its perfect season. The seed does not sprout the moment it is planted, yet the farmer does not despair. He trusts the law of growth and continues to nurture the soil. Likewise, you must trust the law of assumption. Persist without anxious waiting, knowing that the end is certain. Each imaginal act, each return to the wish fulfilled, is a step closer to its outward realization. The promise is sure. If you persist until the assumption feels natural, manifestation is guaranteed. The outer world cannot resist the power of an established inner state, for what is real within must one day be seen without. Persistence is the bridge from desire to fulfillment, from the unseen to the seen, from imagination to fact. Reason and appearances are not final authorities, for they merely report the surface of life, never its cause. What is commonly called reason is bound to the evidence of the senses, measuring what is possible by what has already been seen or experienced. Appearances are the shadows cast by yesterday's imaginal acts, hardened into facts that seem unalterable only because they are already in form. Yet both reason and appearances are powerless before the creative force of imagination, for imagination alone is the fountain of all experience. To give ultimate authority to reason or to appearances is to surrender to effects while ignoring the unseen cause that produces them. When you live only by reason, you confine yourself within the limits of logic, probability, and past experience. Reason may say that wealth is impossible given your current resources, that health is beyond recovery, that love cannot come because of past rejection. But these are conclusions drawn only from visible evidence. Appearances may testify loudly against your desire, showing lack where you imagine abundance, or loneliness where you imagine companionship, but they are not the final word. They are only the reflection of past states, and just as a reflection cannot resist a new image, so appearances must yield when imagination is exercised with persistence and faith. Imagination is not bound by reason. It transcends logic, for it operates from the end, assuming the state desired regardless of the means. When you imagine yourself as already in possession of your desire and feel it as true, you set in motion a chain of unseen events that reason could never predict. The mind, limited to appearances, cannot chart the path by which a dream becomes fact. Yet the subconscious, impressed by assumption, orchestrates all necessary circumstances to fulfill the imaginal act. This is why Neville Goddard insisted that creation is finished, the end already exists in the dimension of imagination, and your task is simply to assume it until it hardens into fact. If you allow appearances to dictate your inner state, you remain bound to the cycle of repetition, recreating the same conditions again and again. You look at lack and feel poor, look at failure and feel defeated, look at illness and feel weak, and thus perpetuate the very states you wish to escape. The key is to withdraw your attention from appearances and place it upon the unseen reality of your fulfilled desire. To live by imagination rather than appearances is to choose the creative cause over the temporary effect. Reason and appearances play their role as servants, not masters. They may inform you of what has been, but they cannot decide what must be. The imagination, guided by feeling, is the only true authority. To stand firm in the wish fulfilled despite all appearances to the contrary is to exercise dominion over life. This inner discipline requires faith, for faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith ignores appearances and claims the unseen reality as true until it becomes visible. Consider how every great achievement defied reason and appearances at its inception. The airplane contradicted reason, which insisted man was bound to the ground. The light bulb defied appearances, which testified to countless failures. Every innovation, every leap forward, was born of imagination refusing to bow to the seeming authority of the senses. So too in personal life, every transformation begins when you dare to imagine beyond what reason declares possible and appearances insist is final. Therefore, do not argue with reason, nor wrestle with appearances. See them for what they are, echoes of the past, powerless to dictate the future. Go within and claim the end you desire. Persist until that assumption feels natural, and soon reason will adjust itself to justify your faith, and appearances will rearrange to confirm your vision. The authority lies not in what the senses reveal, but in what imagination conceives and sustains with feeling. Every visible fact was once unseen imagination, for nothing that exists in the world of form began there. Everything first lived in the invisible realm of thought, vision, and assumption before hardening into fact. The tallest building, the simplest tool, the most complex invention, and the most ordinary event of life all had their beginnings in imagination. A chair was once only the idea of comfort and rest. A bridge was once only the image of crossing from one place to another. Even the life you live today, the conditions that surround you, are the result of imaginal acts you once entertained, whether knowingly or unknowingly. The unseen shapes the seen, and what is visible is merely the shadow of what was once invisible. The law of life is that imagination precedes manifestation. To deny this truth is to mistake effect for cause. The world of facts is nothing more than crystallized imagination, and to attempt to change facts without changing imagination is like rearranging shadows without altering the object that casts them. If you want new facts to appear in your world, you must first conceive them within, for imagination is the workshop of creation, and what is built there must eventually stand before you. Think of how ordinary experiences prove this truth. A conversation you imagined beforehand often plays out with uncanny similarity in reality. A worry you nurtured in silence becomes the very situation you feared. A vision of success, rehearsed inwardly with conviction, attracts the opportunity and circumstances that make it possible. Life never contradicts imagination, it only reflects it. To live unconsciously, allowing fear, doubt, and limitation to dominate your inner world is to fill the outer life with the same. To live consciously, choosing noble imaginal acts and persisting in them until they feel real, is to create facts that correspond to those noble visions. Every advance in human history is testimony to this law. The telephone, the automobile, the airplane, and every marvel of technology began as fantasies in the minds of those who dared to imagine beyond the limits of reason and appearances. They did not look to what was visible to decide what was possible. They looked within and trusted the reality of their inner vision. What the world first mocked as impractical or impossible, imagination later proved as fact. In the same way, the desires of your heart, no matter how unlikely they may appear, already exist as possibilities in imagination, waiting only for your acceptance and persistence to become visible. The subconscious mind does not argue with imagination. It accepts whatever is impressed upon it with feeling and acts to bring it into expression. This is why Neville Goddard emphasized that imagination and faith are the secrets of creation. When you imagine the end and feel it as though it were already true, you plant the seed of a new fact. The world may not change instantly, just as a seed does not become a tree overnight, but the process has begun, and the outcome is certain if you persist. It is vital to understand that visible facts are not final. They are temporary expressions of past imaginal activity, subject to change the moment new imaginal seeds are sown. To accept current conditions as unchangeable truth is to bind yourself to them unnecessarily. To see them instead as effects waiting to be replaced by a higher cause is to reclaim your creative power. Nothing in your life is permanent unless you continue to sustain it in imagination. So the question is never whether change is possible, but whether you will dare to imagine differently. If you continue to imagine lack, failure, or rejection, those imaginal acts will solidify into visible facts. If you instead imagine abundance, success, and love, and persist until those feelings are natural, the outer world must conform. Every fact begins this way. Every result you seek already exists in the unseen. Your task is not to create it from nothing, but to claim it in imagination and hold it fast until it emerges. This understanding transforms the way you see reality. Instead of being intimidated by appearances, you recognize them as past imaginal states already spent. Instead of fighting conditions, you go straight to the root, shaping new facts within before they appear without. You live as a conscious creator rather than a passive observer. You realize that imagination is not idle play, but the very power of creation clothed in your own consciousness. Every visible fact was once unseen imagination, and this truth liberates you from limitation. You are not at the mercy of circumstances, for circumstances are the offspring of imaginal acts. You are not bound by reason, for reason is only the servant of imagination. You are not trapped by facts, for facts are shadows that yield to new light. The same law that produced the life you now see is at work even now, waiting for your next imaginal command. Dare to imagine nobly, to assume boldly, and to persist faithfully, for what you imagine with feeling today will become the visible facts of your tomorrow. Noble imagining leads to noble living, because the quality of your inner world inevitably determines the quality of your outer experience. Imagination is the root of all creation, the silent cause from which every visible fact springs forth. When you imagine ignobly, dwelling on fear, resentment, lack, or limitation, you plant seeds that must bear fruit in the form of circumstances that mirror those states. But when you dare to imagine nobly, when you cultivate visions of love, abundance, integrity, and greatness, you align yourself with higher states of consciousness that must externalize as noble living. The world cannot resist the power of sustained inner conviction, for life is nothing but imagination outpictured, consciousness objectified, and states of mind made visible. The noble life is not achieved through outer effort alone, nor by conforming to the opinions of society, nor by the pursuit of things in the hope they will grant fulfillment. It begins and ends in imagination, for everything a person does flows from what he assumes himself to be within. A man who imagines himself weak will behave in ways that confirm weakness. A woman who imagines herself unloved will unconsciously accept treatment that reflects her inner conviction. Conversely, one who imagines himself noble, strong, wise, generous, and loved cannot help but live in harmony with that assumption, for the inner state governs all outer action. Noble imagining is not mere fantasy. It is the conscious direction of the creative power within. To imagine nobly is to assume the best about yourself and others, to see the world through the lens of higher possibility rather than limitation. When you imagine nobly, you are not ignoring the facts of life, but transcending them, refusing to give them final authority. You recognize that facts are only the hardened shadows of past imaginal acts, and you choose to plant better seeds for a brighter harvest. This is why Neville Goddard taught that imagining creates reality. What you dare to assume inwardly with feeling becomes the world you will inevitably inhabit. Living nobly begins in the stillness of imagination. To rise each morning and clothe yourself inwardly in the dignity of your desired state is to prepare the path for noble conduct throughout the day. If you imagine yourself patient, you will respond with patience where before you reacted in haste. If you imagine yourself loving, you will radiate kindness in situations where you once harbored bitterness. If you imagine yourself successful, your actions will naturally flow in the direction of success, for you cannot long behave in a way that contradicts your dominant self-concept. Noble imagining sets the tone of consciousness, and consciousness sets the stage of life. Consider the difference between one who imagines ignobly and one who imagines nobly. The one who entertains constant thoughts of injustice, lack, and failure lives in a world that echoes those very imaginal states. His words, actions, and circumstances are colored by his inward assumptions, and life appears to him harsh and unfair. The one who imagines nobly, even when appearances contradict, walks with quiet confidence. He may encounter challenges, but he meets them with faith that the end is already secure. He imagines the best outcome, sees others as better than they appear, and trusts that noble vision will clothe itself in fact. In time, his world softens, doors open, relationships transform, and he lives in the peace and joy that accompany noble states. Noble imagining is also the key to transforming relationships. To persist in seeing others through the lens of their faults only perpetuates those faults, for imagination shapes not only the self but the world of others as well. To imagine another nobly, to see them as already better than they appear, is to call forth the nobler side of their nature. Parents who imagine their children wise and capable nurture that wisdom into expression. Friends who imagine each other loyal and loving deepen their bond through that assumption. Even adversaries can be transformed when one refuses to sustain an ignoble vision of them and instead imagines reconciliation, respect, or peace. Noble imagining does not condone wrong behavior, but transcends it, replacing the vision of error with the vision of truth. It is important to understand that noble imagining requires persistence. At first, the old state, the ignoble assumption, may feel more natural because it has been rehearsed for so long. But just as a habit is replaced through repetition, so too can the habit of ignoble imagining give way to noble imagining through deliberate practice. Each time you notice yourself dwelling in fear or resentment, you can pause, turn inward, and replace that vision with one of love, strength, or abundance. Over time, the noble state becomes natural, and what once required effort becomes effortless. When it feels natural, creation is finished, and the world must conform. Noble imagining also elevates your sense of purpose. When you live with noble visions, you are no longer tossed about by appearances or confined to the smallness of circumstance. You live with a sense of inner dignity, knowing that what you imagine with conviction today becomes the fact of tomorrow. This lifts you above petty struggles, for you no longer waste energy fighting conditions. Instead, you go directly to the cause, your imagination, and clothe yourself inwardly with the highest vision. You become a conscious creator, one who directs life rather than reacts to it. Every life is ultimately a reflection of its dominant imagining. To imagine nobly is to create a noble life. To live ignobly is to entertain states of fear, lack, and limitation that must, by law, externalize. The choice lies within each individual, for imagination is always active, always creating, whether consciously or unconsciously. By choosing noble imagining, you align yourself with truth, beauty, and love, and those states, once assumed, must manifest as noble facts in your outer world. Thus, noble imagining is not only the secret to transformation, but the foundation of a life lived with meaning and fulfillment. It is the quiet inner act that reshapes destiny. the unseen cause of every noble deed, every harmonious relationship, every abundant circumstance. To imagine nobly is to live in alignment with the highest possibilities of your being. And when imagination is so directed, noble living is the inevitable result live, now as though your dream were already true. For imagination is not a distant hope, but the creative power shaping your present and your future. To wait until circumstances confirm your desire before you dare to feel it is to reverse the law of creation. For circumstances are never the cause but only the effect. The true cause lies in the unseen activity of consciousness. And the secret of transformation is to occupy the end you seek as though it were already accomplished. When you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and live from that state, you set in motion a chain of events that must, by the certainty of law, bring your dream into visible form. The world mirrors not what you want, but what you are conscious of being. To live in the state of wanting is to confess lack, and life faithfully reflects that lack. To live as though you already have your desire is to assume its reality, and life must echo that reality. This is not make-believe, nor is it idle pretense. It is the deliberate use of imagination, the creative faculty given to every individual, to claim the state desired and to persist in it until it feels natural. When it feels natural to live from your dream, the subconscious accepts it as fact, and what is impressed upon the subconscious must be expressed in the world of experience. Living now as though your dream were already true requires discipline of mind and a willingness to ignore appearances. Appearances may contradict the vision. Reason may argue that it is impossible. Circumstances may shout that nothing has changed. Yet the one who understands the law of assumption knows that these appearances are only the results of past imaginal activity. They have no power to dictate the future unless they are sustained in thought. By refusing to react to what is, and instead dwelling in the feeling of what will be, you withdraw attention from the old state and feed the new one. What you persist in inwardly will inevitably express itself outwardly, for the inner state always finds its corresponding fact. To live from the end is to act, think, and feel in harmony with your fulfilled desire. If your dream is to be successful, you must walk now with the dignity, confidence, and gratitude of one who has already attained success. If your dream is to be loved, you must live now in the warmth, security, and joy of one who already enjoys deep affection. If your dream is to be free, you must assume now the lightness, peace, and certainty of one who is already liberated. The outer world may not yet reflect these states, but the inner world is the true cause. And once the inner is established, the outer must conform. This is why Neville Goddard insisted that creation is finished. Every possible state already exists in the dimension of imagination, waiting only for your assumption to bring it into visibility. To live now as though your dream were already true is to claim your chosen state from among infinite possibilities and to occupy it until it becomes fact. You are not creating something out of nothing. You are selecting and assuming the reality you wish to experience. By living in the end, you align yourself with that state, and it cannot fail to appear in your world. Living now as though your dream were true also frees you from anxiety and striving. When you dwell in the end, you rest in the certainty that it is already done. You no longer chase after results or struggle to make things happen. For you know the world will reflect your assumption in its own time and way. You begin to live with ease, joy, and gratitude, qualities that themselves hasten the manifestation of your desire. This is the true meaning of faith, to believe so fully in the reality of the unseen that you live as though it were already visible. Consider how this principle operates in daily life. If you were to receive wonderful news, say that you had secured a long-desired opportunity, you would immediately feel different, even before you saw the physical proof. Your mood, your posture, your outlook would change, not because circumstances had yet altered, but because you accepted the reality of the news. In the same way, when you accept the reality of your dream in imagination and feel it as true, your entire inner world shifts. That inner shift is the cause of the outer shift, and in time, circumstances will rearrange to reflect the new assumption. The challenge is persistence. The old state may still present itself through lingering appearances, tempting you to return to doubt or frustration. But if you remain faithful to the end, returning again and again to the feeling of fulfillment, you will establish the new state as natural. Once it feels natural, creation is finished, for the subconscious has accepted it, and the world has no choice but to conform. Persistence in living as though your dream were already true guarantees manifestation, for the law cannot fail. This practice also transforms your relationships, your work, and your health. If you imagine nobly and live from the vision of harmony, others respond to you in ways that reflect that assumption. If you live from the state of abundance, opportunities for growth and prosperity present themselves. If you dwell in the state of health, vitality and strength manifest in your body. In every aspect of life, the law is the same: live now, as though your dream were already true, and the dream must reveal itself in fact. To live in this way is to take full responsibility for your world. You no longer blame circumstances, people, or luck, for you know that life only reflects your inner state. This responsibility is also your freedom, for it means you are never at the mercy of appearances. You hold within yourself the power to imagine differently, to assume a higher state, and to live from it until it expresses. You are the operant power, and imagination is your tool. Every great transformation begins with one decision to live now as though the dream were already true. This is the secret of all achievement, the essence of all spiritual teaching, the law that governs creation. When you claim your desire in imagination and persist in living from that state, the unseen becomes seen, the invisible becomes visible, and the dream becomes fact. The outer world is only the echo of your inner world. And when the inner is fixed in the end, the outer cannot resist. Live now as though your dream were already true, and you will soon find that life itself bends to confirm your faith.